Okay, so we are on our series about goal setting. We've gone through a lot of stuff, talking about the past and, how it's important to go back and look at regret and why things didn't work out and, how important that is for us to be able to look in the past so we can move forward and start preparing for the future as we build out successful goals. So this section is actually called Finding Your Why for Your Best Year Ever. This is based on Michael Hyatt's book, Your Best Year Ever, which is probably one of the best goal setting books I've gone through. So your what needs a why. Okay. Your what needs a why. So what are we doing? X, Y, Z. And then the question you always have to ask yourself is why? Why? And you then say, well, why the why? And I'll tell you why. Because we all have a propensity, I have propensities almost daily to want to quit things and just give up, throw the towel in, whether it's, the family or kids or work or whatever it is. There's just always those temptations, just throwing the towel. And you always have to go back and remind yourself, why am I doing this? What is the purpose behind this? What is the deeper reason why, so that you have that fuel to push you when you just want to quit, when you just want to give up, when everything inside of you says, this is not worth it anymore. And so you have to make something that it's a why in your life and make it deep. And so there has to be dream that you have and then work required to attain it. Is the distinction, because we all have these dreams, but it's the work that's going to get you there. And so everybody looks great at the start, right? But progress is really tough. And the road is much longer and it gets super messy when you're trying to do goals. Because, just like the H3 goal for raising the 50,000, we ended up doing 73,000. And I'll tell you, there were a couple of times where I thought, we're not going to get there. It's like, I don't know if we can do this. And there's sometimes I'm like, I just don't even want to do it. And I just had to keep remembering, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And digging deep and saying, no, I cannot allow that, because that kid, I need to have that kid be able to get this money so they can have that moment of transformation. Okay. So it's got to be personal. It's got to be change oriented. And you got to want it now. Otherwise, we're just going to move on to the next thing if we're not really clear about the why. Because unfortunately, we live in a society right now that's very much an instant everything. Right? We just want it now, and it's in some ways that's good, some ways that's dangerous, because it creates a false sense of reality for us. So that's what you need a why for. There's 5 ways to keep going, and we'll unpack these. The first one is perspective. Um, you know, Sometimes it's really important. This is why doing things in community and being in community and being authentic in community is so important, because it gives you perspective. When all of a sudden, I've run many groups with men, and I remember how many times I've heard somebody share something they're struggling with, and then all of a sudden 2 or 3 people say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm struggling with the same thing. And this perspective starts to change, that they're not the only one in the room that's having this tough time. And so it gives you a sense of perspective that helps you keep going, so you feel like, I'm not alone in this. I remember a friend of mine one time who's struggling in his marriage called me up, and they've continued to encourage them to get into a community. And they said, he just said, I'm going through this, and this. And I said, yeah. Well, I said, you and everybody else. And he said, no, that's not true. And I said, no, it is. I said, you're not alone in that. I said, you need to remember that's part of the reason why you need to be connected, to have a different perspective so you can keep going and not give up. Number 2 is a new frame. We talked about this idea of the narrative in our head, reframing the frustrations, finding a foothold in that for momentum, and then starting to really reframe the things by asking different questions. I spoke the other night at a men's group, and I talked about the fact that when you ask a question, your brain gets hijacked and it starts looking for the answer for what it is you asked. So if you are starting to reframe things, you can start to ask different questions like, how could I grow in this? What else could this mean besides what it is I'm thinking it is? What's a different way that I can look at this that can give me a sense of hope and joy and excitement about where it is that I'm headed? And you're training yourself to reframe what it is that you are doing. Number 3 is self-compassion. This is just another way to rid of perfectionism and a self-loathing or self-beating up or a shame-oriented notion. There was a quote that said, you know, if anything is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And you kind of laugh, but it's saying just go do it and get messy, just like you guys did with hiring this person for leads. Just go for it and we'll learn along the way. And then just give yourself a break. Just having the ability to talk to yourself and say, hey, you know what? It's okay. I'm doing fine. And, you know, we're going to get through this. The fourth one is a sense of agency. So what I mean by this is that it gives you the ability to get out of victim mode and just say, hey, you know what? I want to achieve this thing and it's going to work. I'm going to have to do the work to get to success. Entitlement starts to complain about what's not being done. I was in a meeting this morning and there was a lot of complaining going around about all the things that weren't changing. And I kept thinking, well, gosh, maybe we could do something about that and just take ownership and realize we have agency to make a choice on what we can do to start to change things. And that could be another motivator to keep us going. And the fifth one is just, again, your why. What is not somebody else's why, but what is your personal why? What is it that really touches your soul and makes it so that the blood boils in your body to where when you think about it, you go, oh my gosh, that gives me chills. And that's just really going to move things for me personally. So are there any of those 5 things that hit you or anything that sticks out for you in this idea of 5 ways to keep going?
I really love when you talked about reframing, the way you think about things. Like, I think like specifically the fact that it's like you said, what else could this mean for me? I think it's so important to like notice that, our lives are so connected, and like our work life and the things that we're, striving to attain for at work could be very connected. And I mean, they are very connected with like our personal growth. So what else does that mean for my life? Hey, if I can gain freedom in this area, or if I can get better in this area or find more balance, what does that mean for the rest of my life? And that could be a huge impact. So I really like that.
That's awesome. I love that. Just the interconnectedness.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. What else? By the way, you might be on mute if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, I think that the concept of, the less excuses you make or blaming, the further you're always going to progress. So, in general, I always think about like, what is my why in doing the activity I'm doing? So when I put into perspective here, the why I pick up the phone every day is because there's a lot of lives that could be impacted by that phone call I make, or there's an amazing relationship on the other side of that call. So it's almost like the uncertainty kind of keeps me going because I don't know what's going to happen, but it's exciting to imagine the possibility. So I think that's kind of how I go about things in my daily life. And it's been just amazing. And kind of relating to Michelle, it's like in my daily life, it also does connect to my work life too. So, and speaking of feeling natural, that's natural for me. So it's amazing.
I love that, Dan. I really love that a lot, because what you've done is you've just created a whole new perspective. And that phone call that could be just a fear-based type of thing, and you turned it to this sense of curiosity and wonder. It's like, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going to come out of this one phone call that could completely change the trajectory of where it is that I'm heading, or who I can touch and impact. That's a totally different mind shift. I love that. It's huge. Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Pressure, but if there any other comments, otherwise I'll keep going.
I was just gonna say I like the idea of a different perspective, because I kind of feel like this encourages me to share, you know, my experiences throughout my life, because you never know who you could impact. And there's also just this sense of peace when you hear, like, you know, somebody else is going through the same thing you are, or, you know, you can relate to somebody on like a deeper level. And there's that sense of peace of like, they get me, they understand me. And so, like, it encourages me to like be open and authentic with people, but then also on the flip side, like, be a good listener and like be open to, you know, new ideas and new perspectives on things. So it's just kind of this like, it really opens your mind to, you know, what can you get out of this conversation, or what impact will you have on people's lives if you share, you know, your story and whatnot.
It's huge. It's a big one. People need to hear your story, and it is game changing when we do. We don't even realize it sometimes. That's awesome. Okay, so we'll keep going here. Identify key motivation for you. What, you know, use your motivation. Why is this so important for me to achieve this? Because again, we can have external motivations, and I'm not saying those are bad, but it's more powerful to have intrinsic motivations, things that are very personal. There's a hope, there's a value, there's a motivation that comes from an intrinsic element, as opposed to just a reward of some sorts that could be external. You know, Steve Jobs, you know, once he left Apple and, you know, had to come back to basically save him from BK, you know, he just had a very focused and personal mission to just create this simple but elegant machine that, you know, revolutionized, because it was visioneering the whole industry. And so, you know, you really need to decide what are your key motivations and list them. You know, make a list, literally write down, you know, whittle it down to 3, prioritize them, rank them. And, you know, you just really need to ask yourself, what is it that's motivating me, you know, in this specific position? And then write that down and just share it, even make a list of it. And so people lose their way when they lose their why. Just remember that people lose their way when they lose their why. So you have to keep revisiting it over and over again. I have a whole document that I've written that I go revisit at least 4 times a week, just to remind myself, why am I doing this? Where are we going? Because there's days I'm tired and I want to throw in the towel, and I have to keep saying, no, there's something way deeper going on that's just keeping me going. And we need it. We need to be encouraged and motivated. Focus on the feeling of accomplishment, you know, not just the, you know, accomplishment itself, but what will it feel like? You know, that's one of the things we talk about. What is it going to look like when we get to the finish line? But I'd even say, what will it feel like to get there? What's the emotion that you're going to feel? The anticipation and excitement, the exhilaration, the sense of wonder, the sense of shock, just being overwhelmed and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got here. How did I do it? I think that's really important, to tie an emotion to it so that there's something really powerful to it. Sometimes I'll be writing things down and then I'll actually play a song that's highly intense, highly emotional. just so I can tie it to that specific thing I'm trying to accomplish, and just remember what it's going to feel like when I get to that moment in time, and just how powerful it will feel. I'm reminded of the movie Braveheart, if you've ever seen it. It's one of my favorite movies, and there's just these moments where he's just laying his life out, and it's all for this concept of freedom, but it's super emotional. It's very impactful. And so we just have to remember we are emotional creatures. So any thoughts on that or comments before I go on?
I'm definitely a focus on the feeling of accomplishment person. Like when I do anything that, like if I'm studying for something and I have to stay up all night doing it, I'll get the question of, how are you continuing to just like push through and stay awake or work as hard as you are? And I just remember like whenever I'm done and whenever I do accomplish what I'm trying to get to, it's going to feel so rewarding that it's worth whatever the work is.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that just, and again, that's part of your why, that's part of your motivation, that's an emotional feeling of like, this is going to feel so good, if I get there. In fact, they've studied a bunch of people that work out, and the number one thing is just the feeling they have when they're done working out. Interesting, isn't it? So that can be a motivation. And so I love hearing that, of just, that is your motivation, is that feeling you're going to have accomplishment. So it's awesome. Okay, stages of life. So, I love the way that the author breaks this up, and he says, there's 3 elements that I break out in my life, and I have to make sure I manage all 3 of them, which is, he says, there's the front part of the stage. When I'm on the front of stage, he says for him, this is about the most high revenue impact items he does. I kind of do this throughout the week, where I have certain times segmented out that I know are high impact, high revenue activities that I have blocked out to manage appropriately. So those would be the front stage of my life. Then you have backstage, which is probably more of the mundane or preparation, when I'm preparing for the week, and I'm, on Fridays preparing what the week's going to look like. Those are backstage things, just preparing things. And then there's off stage stuff, which is you just completely get off stage, which for people that are motivated struggle with this one, but it's really important to have rest and rejuvenation, and just time to really slow down, have margin. And it's scientifically proven you have to do this if you really want to be in it for the long term, not burn out. And so I've had to really work on that myself over the last year or two, of just really making that a priority, just having rest and rejuvenation, so that I can really be on stage for a long time, and in the backstage, and not just completely be out of the game. So it just kind of gives you a visual of how you could break up your life. What are the on stage in the front, revenue kind of producing or high impact things? Backstage are just sort of preparation things, and then off stage is rest and rejuvenation. Mastering motivation. You've really got to master motivation if you're going to be great at achieving goals. You have to have grit. That's one of the characteristics we really are looking for in people working here, is they've got to have grit. I mean, you've got to, I sat down with one of the guys we're thinking about hiring right now, and, I just kind of had a real kind of candid and gracious conversation. And I just said, this is going to be hard, and it's going to be tough, and you're not going to make a ton of money in the first year, and you're going to work your tail off, and you're going to get rejected. And I mean, if you would have listened to me, you'd think, well, gosh, you're trying to talk him out of it. And in one sense I was, but in the other sense, I wanted to really test him to see if he's serious, because it takes grit. And, we look for that in people. You're not going to just give up easy. So you have to internalize that reward, that it's self-justified, and there's an end in of itself, could just be that feeling, kind of like Lana talked about, value it more, and we'll value things more when we do it. We'll have joy that'll start to come from doing things. The more and more you do things and get into the habit of doing them, they'll actually become a joy in of themselves. I've told you guys, I used to struggle going to the gym. it was really hard for me. And now I just enjoy it. I really enjoy just the act of doing it. And so that can be a joy in of itself when you really start to overcome and master motivation. Um, the mastery in action is you've got to take pride in what you're doing and feel like it's an investment that you're doing. To make things a habit, you've heard 21 days. It's actually not true. Scientifically, you've heard it a bunch, but it could take longer than that. It's sort of a myth. They've actually talked about the fact that complex habits can actually take 66 up to 200 days. So don't be discouraged if you don't just get a habit in 21 days. It's actually could take longer. And so we have to give ourselves the permission to go through and make that a habit. So some of the ways you can do that is by tracking streaks, where you have a check mark on a calendar or some way in which you can see it visually. Jerry Seinfeld used to do this every day. He'd say, I'm going to write a joke every single day, and he would have a streak so he wouldn't break the chain of the streak. This could be for sales calls you're going to make per week, or date nights per week, or just doing small things every day, making it a game or tracking the streaks. And you could make it a game. You could gamify it. Could it be a fun game that you could do to turn it into something that's fun for you and that you're winning? You want to measure the gain. This is a comment by Dan Sullivan. And he says, measure the gain, not the gap. Sometimes we're always looking at the gap. Well, I'm not there, and this is how far I'm from it. But he says, I want you to measure what the gain is. See how far you've already come. And when you're like, what have I already accomplished in my life? And he says there's these lagging, which is looking backwards, achievements, one-offs or deadlines, and the lead measures are looking forward and measuring the activity. Like I said, sales calls or incremental changes, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, just to reiterate, we've got to work on habits that could take longer than we think. Ways you can do that is by tracking the streaks, having a spreadsheet if you're a nerd like me, or you could have something visual. So you have a chain of things. You see yourself having success, measuring the gain that you're doing and not the gap as you go forward. So you can keep that motivation going. And then just remember that, just like you guys talked about today, I didn't even tee this up, it just happened, but you guys really, I think part of the reason you've had so much success with this is you were doing it with friends. You're doing it together. You're doing it as a team. And so this is something that will really be instrumental as you go so much further, just because you're with your friends, you're with the coworkers, and you'll go so much further. When I used to play rugby, we had to run 2.5 miles and 10 100s and 10 50-yard dashes every day, 6 days a week outside of practice. And we used to pair up with friends, and I would tell the team, I was the captain, I said, I want you guys to use this analogy of wearing your shirt. And so every day you ask your friend who's going to run with you, are you wearing your shirt? Meaning, did you do your running? And you'll hold each other accountable, but you do it with your friends and you'll get much further. This myth of self-made this and self-made that's just not true. We're social by nature. We need help. Iron sharpens iron. And we need to be in a community that's positive and contagious that will help us move towards where we need to go. We need to be intentional so that we can accelerate our learning. We can encourage one another. We can hold each other accountable. Sometimes we can even have some competition, which is a good kind of pressure. But you have to choose the people that you connect with wisely. You have to be selective. He talks about just telling people, everybody, your goals makes it less likely to happen. But if you share with private friends that are trusted what you're trying to accomplish, the goal goes up exponentially. I think it's just because we go further when we have a group of people we trust. And so we want to be around abundant thinkers, And there's all sorts of things you can do in your own life, running, exercise groups, masterminds, coaching. I have tons of coaches in my life just because I want to accomplish what I need to. So what do we do with this? Take action. And here's 3 things I would encourage you guys to take action on. Write down your personal why. If you've not done that, I want you to do it. I want you to literally put it on your calendar and write it down. It doesn't take you a long time, and you don't need to be perfect. It'll change over time, but write it down and have it somewhere where you can visit it or see it. Number 2 is to write down the ways you will master the motivation. I gave you a couple of ideas of, having some gamifying or tracking things. What is it will help you master the motivation? And then finally, just find friends to do things with. Don't do it alone. And I'm confident if you do this, that you'll see something really powerful happen at the end of the day. So that's what I've got.